This one is going to be a big one, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I know I'm going to be a little emotional about it. And when I say a little emotional, it could be a lot emotional. I don't know. We'll find out. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sitting with Shar. My name is Sharni, aka Charmander29, and today's episode is a bit of a personal one. It is very close to my heart, but it is something that I wanted to share and discuss. I've actually had this topic requested a lot on my live streams on Twitch and YouTube. I do a lot of fundraising for cancer, and I talk a lot during those fundraising streams about how I lost my grandpa and my pop to different types of cancer. And in those conversations on stream, a lot of people in chat will talk to me about grief and loss. And I have brought up doing a podcast episode about these subjects, and a lot of people have really wanted me to. So here we are, I guess. We're doing the thing. I'm no expert at grief or loss. This episode is purely coming from my experiences. But over the years, I have learnt a lot about grief, and I understand, I think, a lot more now than I used to. And for a lot of people who maybe are in my shoes and experiencing grief for the first time, or know that they will be experiencing grief for the first time, it can be a very scary, daunting, and confusing experience. As I said, I'm not a professional in this, and I want to keep some things to myself in terms of my personal life and my experiences with grief and the losses that I have experienced, because those are for me. Those are some really hard things that I don't feel comfortable sharing on the internet. What I do feel comfortable sharing is an experience that I had actually only a week and a half ago that I have been thinking a lot about and reflecting on a lot. It took me a couple of days to write this episode up and get all of my thoughts together about everything. And I will talk about my loss and my grief and some things that helped me. But I also want to use this episode to sort of reflect on this new part of my grief that I didn't expect. I didn't see it coming. And I'm hoping it will be insightful to you, or maybe you'll hear this and you'll just see it as common sense. But for me, it was a very big turning point, and it definitely impacted me very deeply. So I wanted to talk about it. Oh, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe and, whatever the buttons are telling you about good reviews and thumbs up and all that jazz. Like, if you want to do that, that would be amazing. Taking the time to leave a good review and subscribe, it helps a lot more than I think a lot of people realize. So thank you in advance for that. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's get into it. So, a bit of a background. As I previously said, I have hosted a lot of charity events through my live streaming on Twitch and YouTube. I do multiple events throughout the year, every year. We raise money for multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes. I believe we are trying to add in another one. I'm not too sure. I like to do a lot of fundraising, basically. And a big one is every February, I do a fundraiser at the end of February in honor of my pop and my grandpa, who I lost to different types of cancer. So my pop, I lost to stage 4 leukemia in 2020, right before the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything like that. He passed away on the 29th of February. Of course, it was a leap year. um, kept us on our toes. And then in 2017, on February the 28th, I lost my grandpa to prostate cancer that had metastasized or spread to his bones, amongst other things. And both of these impacted me very deeply. And both of these losses are a discussion in today's story. A lot of this story revolves around the time when I lost my grandpa. We called him Rogie. So we didn't call him grandpa because he said it made him feel old. And I still love that. That still makes me laugh every time. He didn't want to feel old. He wasn't grandpa, he was Rogie. Where do I even begin? This is why I had to write this script out, because I could talk about this man forever. When I was little, I was very, very close to my grandpa. He was there for practically every part of my life. I swear, since the day I was born, I think I saw him 3 to 4 times a week, every week of my life, up until when he passed. He would pick us up from school. He would celebrate our birthdays and our special events. He would be there for harmony days and grandparents' days at school, and he was there when I got diagnosed with diabetes. He took me to my first blood test and held my hand, and he was always there. Rogie was the most kind, caring, and soft-spoken person that I have ever met, and I'm still yet to meet anyone like him. I, along with many others, can say that we never heard him say a bad word about anyone. And at his funeral, there were people at the door. He was so loved. He was an incredible person. And he was a huge, important, and integral part of my life. And I wouldn't be who I am today without him. I was very, very lucky to be his grandchild and to have him in my life. So growing up, I was always encouraged to chase my dreams, no matter how out there or crazy they were. My parents, Rogie, my family, I was very supported and very encouraged to go for it. And I knew since I was little that I wanted to help people for a living and have a positive impact on people's lives. I started reading a family medical book when I was 4 and pretending to be a doctor and diagnosing my parents with different conditions and things. Slowly over the years, I fell in love with science and with cell structure and biology. And in 2017, I was determined to do well in my final year of high school and to get the grades that I wanted to have as many options as possible in terms of going to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I didn't know what career pathway would suit me or what would be good for me. I mean, all I knew was that I liked science and I liked cells, and I had no clue what to do with that. I felt very lost, but I was determined to work hard in that final year of study to keep as many of those doors open as possible. That was my goal. So I put all of my electives in for as many science-related subjects as possible. Apart from physics, I was and still am a biology girly to this day. Physics, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to all of you physics people out there. It's just not for me. I can't wrap my head around it. And yeah, I put all of my electives in and I got ready for the biggest year of my academic pathway to date. I remember being so nervous and so excited. So many people for so long had told me about how big and important this year was, how much fun it was, how intense it was, and it was going to be life-changing. And they were right. It was definitely life-changing, just not in the way that I thought it would be. And that's when my world fell apart. I started year 12 at the beginning of February 2017, and in the last week of that same month, Roger passed away. He had had some pre-existing health problems that I won't get into. I don't know if that's appropriate to share on the internet, but he did have prostate cancer that had metastasized to his bones. And in that same week, he took a fall that he never recovered from. I don't actually know if I can or if I ever will forget that day, because obviously it was such a significant event in my life. It was also school photo day. And Roger had passed away at 6 a.m. that morning. But my parents knew that it was school photo day and they didn't want us to be deterred and to miss out with this devastating news. So they knew that the school photos were done in the morning and then they would tell us after. I don't blame them, to be honest. I would not have been able to keep my shit together for a school photo, let alone my year 12 school photos, which, like, there was a whole section in the yearbook just for that. So, you know, it was kind of important and I can understand their reasoning behind it. I was in study period after school photos. I was laughing with friends and sort of studying, but mostly just chatting. I'm not going to lie. A lot of those quote unquote study periods were a chance to hang out with friends and listen to music and try your best to sort of study. But a lot of people would relax in that time and just take a breath from the intensity of all of the classes that we were in and everything that we were doing. At least that's what I felt like anyway. So I was in this study period and laughing and having fun with friends and sort of studying, not really. And the office lady came into the study room and said that my parents were here to pick me up and take me home from school early. And for those of you who do not know my family or my parents, this is the biggest red flag ever. Why? Because growing up in my household, you had to be dead or dying to get a day off of school. I knew straight away that Roger was gone. Since he'd taken the fall, my mum had not left his side all week, and I knew nothing at all could tear her away from that hospital room. So for her to be at my school, picking us up in the middle of a school day, I remember being overwhelmed by the deepest, most empty and all-consuming grief possible. Losing Roger left a hole in my soul that can never be filled. And I know that that sounds really dramatic, but it's the best way that I can describe the feeling. I was helped out of the study room by my group of friends and Graham. My parents later on told me about how incredible it was to see so many people surrounding and supporting me. And to this day, I know that I am so lucky to have had such a huge support network around me during that time that year. I was so lucky to not be alone. As you can probably imagine, this all-consuming grief that I felt that day that I got that news, it didn't exactly go away after a day or a week or a month. In fact, it still lives in me today. There's this theory that I like to think of when it comes to grieving, and when I've spoken about it on stream, a lot of people who have lost loved ones also relate to it. So I thought I should share it on here too. It's something I learned in counseling, and it's called the ball in a box theory. And on Google, it is described as, quote, "The ball in a box grief theory is a simple analogy explaining grief as a large bouncing ball in a box of life with a pain button. Initially, the ball fills that box and is constantly hitting that button, but over time, the ball shrinks or life grows, hitting the button less often, though the pain remains just as intense as when it is triggered, showing grief changes but never fully disappears. This helps normalize unpredictable, intense moments of sadness and validates that grief evolves rather than ends." That year when we first lost Rogie, that button triggering that overwhelming grief was being pressed constantly, and it was always in the most inconvenient of times. It was in the middle of class when my teacher would be talking about an important topic that we'd be getting tested on later in the week. It would be in the middle of birthdays or sitting down for dinner, going to sleep, waking up from sleep, literally doing nothing at all. That button would be hit and I would be gone in a puddle of tears and inconsolable sobbing. I couldn't understand why Rogie was gone. I couldn't understand why he had passed. It was all so sudden, and I often would beg for him to come back in some sort of desperate attempt to fight reality and fate. I would beg whatever was out there in that universe to bring him back. Obviously, that didn't work. And my year 12 was filled with not only the normal intense hours of study, classes, tests, and exams, but all of that was riddled with that damn button being pressed again and again and again. I remember that same year wondering if this was normal and if I was being oversensitive and I should have moved past this grief already. I shouldn't be reacting like this anymore. And I'll tell you now what I wish I could tell my younger self. Grief is a unique and individual experience. It has no time frame and no timeline. And although the stages of grief exist, it's normal to go backwards and forwards between these stages and skip around through them, only to go back to the start again not long after you've reached the end. It's okay to still be grieving when others think that you shouldn't be. Grief is a reflection of the love that you held for that person that you lost. And although it is oh so painful, I now look at it as a sign of how lucky I was to have loved Rogie so deeply. I said at the start of the episode that this was a story that happened to me recently, and all of this happened back in 2017, so I better get on with it. So later on in 2017, with the help of school careers coordinators, I finally found the career path that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to become a laboratory technician. I applied for a Bachelor of Medical Science, specializing in pathology, for an early entry, meaning that I wouldn't need my end-of-year score to get into the degree. And I crossed my fingers and my toes. Around a week before my final exam started, I was accepted. I didn't need my ATAR, and it didn't matter what I got on my end-of-year exams. I was in. I couldn't believe it. The weight fell from my shoulders. The stress of what score I'd get after such a tumultuous year of grief and study finally lifted. I felt like I could breathe. Nevertheless, I still tried hard at my exams and I got a score that I was okay with, but it was far below the goals that I had set for myself at the beginning of the year. I tried to be kind to myself and to remember that grief had taken a lot of my energy that year, and the score that I had gotten was good, with all things considered. I graduated and left high school and went into my gap year where I worked 3 jobs and went to a lot of therapy and prepared myself to move out of home for the first time. And as I did, the grief followed me. In university, my degree focused on the body and how it presents and functions in a healthy state, and then how it presents and functions in an unhealthy state, aka a pathological state. Hence, the Bachelor of Medical Science, specializing in pathology. Over those 5 grueling years, I saw so many conditions and diseases, including the cancers that claimed the lives of Rogie and my pop. These were presented all nice and neat on a little labeled slide that I got to look at under a microscope. And it's one thing to look at cancer on a slide and to see those cancerous malignant cells. It's another thing to realize that this is what someone is experiencing throughout their entire body when living with this condition, and that this slide is just a tiny representation of what is going on in their body. My heart broke when I saw what my grandpa and my pop must have suffered through and how abnormal these slides looked compared to how they were meant to look in a healthy person. At that moment, I found myself determined to graduate, to help people going through the same cancers as my pop and Rogie in whatever way that I could in a professional manner. This thought continued to motivate me through the remainder of my degree, through every job interview and every moment that got me closer and closer to that dream role of finally being a scientist. And about a month ago, I was offered the position as a scientific officer. Finally, I was going to be living my dream of being a scientist. I was going to be able to help people and work in a field that I found challenging, interesting, and rewarding. I threw myself into the training and I was passionate and excited to do my best. And to my relief, I found that I adored it so much. A lot of people go through university and do degrees and graduate only to find that they don't like the field that they are in. And I cannot explain the relief that I felt when I realized that I still felt just as passionate about this area as I did all those years ago. Then, about a week ago, it finally happened. I received a patient's blood samples to test, and the patient had a malignant neoplasm of the prostate, aka prostate cancer. I saw this on the request form that came with the blood samples, and I froze. I stared at the form and at my screen and realized that this was what I'd been waiting for. The moment that I'd thought of countless times in my degree, at 3 a.m. in the morning when I would be studying molecular pathology or biochemistry or anatomy and physiology. That moment that I'd held so highly in my mind was finally here, and I felt nothing. Well, not nothing. I felt the professional detachment that I'd worked hard to form over my years of working in healthcare and my experience in laboratories as a technical assistant and in my work experience. One part of working in this field is understanding that it is important to have a professional detachment from the work that you are doing to help the patients as best you can. Having emotions and getting upset about a patient's condition is not helping them. And And it is important to be able to separate those emotions and put them to the side. And then after you go home at the end of the day, that is when you can reflect on those emotions. So that's what I felt at that time. So I entered the sample into the laboratory. I took the tubes to the appropriate analyzers and I ran the tests. Then I moved on to the next patient. And that was it. After my shift that day, I sat in my car trying to understand why this moment that I'd worked so hard to get to hadn't felt like I dreamt it would. It took me a few days of contemplating, but it finally hit me. This need to help others with the same cancers as my grandpa, as Rogie and my pop. It was a reflection of my grief and my urge to have control over a situation that had thrown my life completely out of control. It was almost like my younger 17, 18-year-old self felt if I could be in a higher, more important, more direct role in regards to cancer treatment and to the health and well-being of cancer patients, I could finally do what I couldn't do all those years ago for my pop and for Rogie. I could save them from the thing that killed them. But now, having been faced with that situation, I've realized that even when you pour yourself completely into something, it doesn't always mean that you are in control or that you can be. Even though I have years of knowledge about these conditions and tests and I have studied them down to the cellular level, I can only provide information to help this patient through their treatment, through their recovery, through their journey with cancer. I can't control their cancer and I can't take it away. And that's why I didn't react how I'd imagined I would. I thought I could be more in control of this thing. I can't. And that's okay. The point of this story and the point of this episode is that sometimes things will happen and there's nothing that you can do to change it. As much as I wanted to all those years ago, I couldn't change the outcome of those cancers in my pop and my grandpa. I couldn't take them away. I couldn't change what was happening. Now, as a scientist, as someone who has a direct impact on these people's lives, I still can't do that. I have more knowledge now. I have more experience and I have more abilities to create a positive impact in people's lives by keeping them informed and by giving them information to help with their treatment and with their journey. But I can't control what their cancer does. I miss Rogie every day. But now that button is pressed a lot less than it used to be. And I keep Rogie with me every day. In the smallest of details, I keep his memory alive. He's my phone background. I have a photo of him on my work desk that I say good morning to every day I go into work. I play solitaire on my computer just like he used to when I was a kid. When I hear songs that he liked from Johnny Cash or Casey Chambers. I stop and I listen and I think about him. And all of these things obviously will never fill that hole that I spoke about, that part of me that I lost that day that he passed. But it does bring me some sense of peace, and it makes me smile to remember how lucky I am to have had him in my life. That's my story. A couple of things before I end the episode as well, a couple of tidbits. Firstly, I do want to point out that when I say that you can pour yourself into something and it doesn't mean that you can be in control, that is not to say that focusing yourself and pouring yourself into something is meaningless or worthless or that there is no point. That is not what I'm saying at all. I want to point out that dedicating yourself to something and working hard, that is an incredible thing that a lot of people cannot do. And there is purpose and there is meaning to doing so. I don't want it to seem like I am saying there is no point in you chasing your dreams, because there's no point. That's not what I'm saying. I also want to say that even though I had this revelation and even though I had this moment of unexpected grief and reflection and all of these thoughts, I don't want it to seem like I don't love my job. I adore it still. I can't explain how much I love being able to help people for a living. It's been a dream of mine since I was a kid, reading that medical book. And this revelation in my journey has not changed that. I love the work I do. I love the way it challenges me and the way that I go home at the end of every day, knowing that I have made a difference and a positive impact in people's lives and even contributed in saving lives, which is so crazy to even think about. Even though I can't control cancer, I can honor my grandpa's memory by playing a huge and integral role in the health and well-being of people every day. And I can't explain the joy and fulfillment that that brings me. I know that they'd be proud of me. And that's it. Somehow I made it through that with minimal tears. I cannot believe it. Needless to say, I cried a lot writing it, so I probably got most of it out then. So let me know what you thought of the story. This was a very personal episode that was very close to my heart. It is quite healing for me now as a 26-year-old woman to look back on myself as a 17-year-old and to be able to see that over time, I have been able to honor his memory more than I have grieved the loss. The love that I have for him has not changed. It is just presenting differently than it was all those years ago. So yeah, enough with all the sappy. Please let me know what you thought of the episode below. Remember to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, everything like that. I promise the next one will be a bit more lighthearted. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sitting with Shar. This is the new format where I talk about things all by myself. I talk about the serious and the not so serious things that I've kind of been thinking about in life. Not all of them are going to be like this. So I promise there's going to be some fun ones. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.